Okay, good morning. We're going to give everyone another 30 seconds to get comfortable, and then we're going to get started. So bear with us for another 30 seconds. Thank you. Another 20 seconds, everyone, and then we're going to get started. So yeah, bear with me, and welcome to my kitchen. All right, that is 20 seconds. So welcome, good morning, or good afternoon, or if you're playing this on record, hello to the future. But thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm Jason. I'm the CISO for Recorded Future. Yeah, I'm in my kitchen, as you can see here today. And we've got a really fantastic, popular and recurring discussion today around vulnerability management, vulnerability prioritization. And very pleased to introduce Yaniv, who is the co-founder and CEO of Vulcan.io on the call today. So Yaniv, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Yep. Thank you, Jason. I'm really happy to be here. Hello, everybody. In wherever you are in the world or in your timelines. I'm Yaniv. I co-founded Vulcan 6 years ago, based on a personal pain that we've had. So prior to Vulcan, I worked for a very large Israeli integrator. They did very large projects to governments. And as part of one of these projects, we were asked to start doing vulnerability management on the deliverables that we bring. And we were very optimistic about our ability to do it effectively. We scanned the entire project. We worked for 3 months, fixed all of the issues, scanned again, just to find out that everything we did was practically irrelevant. And we said to ourselves, okay, probably someone is doing it appropriately. We started asking around. We realized that this is a probably 2-decade-old problem. And we had a couple of ideas on how to resolve it. And that led to probably the most interesting 6 years of my professional career, building Vulcan Cyber as an exposure management and vulnerability management company.
Nice. Thanks for the introduction, Yaniv. So for everyone on the call, just a little bit of housekeeping. We tend to try and keep these interactions to about 30 to 35 minutes, depending on how much we get wrapped up into it. But we intend to leave 20, 25 minutes or so for questions, Q&A as well. So I'd highly encourage all of you to put any questions, comments into the Q&A feature, and Yaniv and I will attempt to try and get through as many of them as we can. So go at it and think about what are the best questions you want to throw at us. So Yaniv, let's start on vulnerability management, vulnerability prioritization, as you say, is 25, 30-year-old problem. I think it's easy for us to scream and shout about the problems and the challenges, but I'd like to start on the positives. From your engagements with clients around the world, is there any positives? Is there any good news on this? Because I'm tired of hearing all the bad stuff, and it's nice to focus on some of the wins.
Yeah, there are plenty, and I think they're becoming more prevalent in recent years. So I think vulnerability management has better reputation for several reasons. One is that unlike a lot of other security activities, especially the more famous ones, incident response, SOC-related issues, that are practically almost autonomous in the way that security folks are handling them. In vulnerability management, application security, this entire realm of risk, we are always, as security folks, we are dependent on someone outside of the security team to actually get to a resolution. This requires us to maneuver through different bureaucracies of the organization, but also it puts us as a subject of a lot of scrutiny. And when we started, and even prior, the approach around patching and vulnerability management was that everything has to be addressed, and everything has to be addressed immediately, and everything is urgent. And obviously, this is not the case. We know that today. And I believe that as a result of the scrutiny, as a result of the changes, both in technologies, the market, the attack surface, we started to realize as an industry that not everything is urgent. Not everything is important. We don't have to do everything. We need to do what's important, what is important and relevant for our organization. It's a subjective matter. And there are approaches like risk-based, intelligence-led, around vulnerability management or risk management in general that are becoming more prevalent, and allows our customers, as well as their counterparts, to really focus on what matters most, and to do the things that are important to the business. And we see that organizations that are implementing these type of approaches, and are putting the right measurements, and are able to communicate based on a mutual goal with the remediation owners, with the people outside of the security team, can effectively drive these programs without the scrutiny and without the frustration. And this is something that becomes more common. There's more attention to it. It goes all the way up to boardrooms and CISOs. And I believe this is a refreshing change. It will continue and grow. And it allows eventually the people who have handled it for years to do it, and also even, God forbid, have fun while doing it, versus just subject themselves to committees and Excel sheets and scrutiny and such. So this is, in my opinion, very positive. And the organizations we work with that does that are able to move their programs forward very, very, very significantly.
That's a great opening point. Having fun and vulnerability management seem like two phrases that don't belong in the same sentence, but there's a few things that I just want to pull apart a little bit more. And I think what I try and distill what you said there is that we focus too much on talking about every vulnerability, and we focus very much on a quantitative. I've seen multiple CISOs report, I've got this many very high, these many critical vulnerabilities in my estate this week, and I'm trying to trend it down. And I think what we need to move away from is that quantitative metric to more of a contextual set of metrics that put that into a little bit more priority and urgency, don't we?
Yep. So I actually think it's an interesting topic, because obviously we want to measure risk in a qualitative manner. But when you look at the program, again, the risk program, the findings program, it could be vulnerability management, AppSec, cloud security, whatever it is, everything that handles posture, these pre-incident type of findings, the qualitative measurements that you want to measure, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples in a minute, that are applied by customers, what we recommend, are important to create this, let's say, common grounds between mainly executives and operational folks that are doing what they're doing. But you cannot neglect the quantitative KPIs when it comes to the actual operation, because when we think about it, you always have to create this risk reward or action reward type of activity when it comes to the things that are recurring and happening all the time, because vuln management is rinse and repeat. You always have to do that. And as part of that, you want to make sure that people understand that even if they are remediating vulnerabilities that are not critical, high or medium, that are still important to remediate, they still have value to them. Although they don't move maybe the high-level qualitative matrix, there are quantitative KPIs we want to show them: remediation velocity, ratio between how much you fix and how much are introduced. These are not qualitative; these are quantitative as a whole. So these are, I think, important to measure, or to at least give us signals on how do we move the qualitative bars. But when it comes to the qualitative bars, and I'll give just three very interesting qualitative matrix that you can use, both from a high level as well as from a risk scoring level, can eventually allow you to balance these two sides of the organization. So I'll just give one qualitative mechanism that our customers apply. When you think about risk is very subjective, and it's something that you define for your organization. Every organization defines risk differently, and the bigger the organization is, by the way, the more nuanced could be their perception around how risk should be perceived. But there are a couple of things after you have set the building blocks: what is critical, what is high, what is medium, and what is low. It allows you to translate it to how would it impact your organization. And the best mechanism for that are SLAs, very similar to software bugs. If you take the vulnerabilities and you assign them to SLAs, critical, 1 day, high, 30 days, medium, 180 days, low, never, or some will do a year. Okay, you have the ability to measure how well are you staying within your risk appetite. Because what the SLA actually means, it means that you are willing to tolerate the existence of a high vulnerability in your environment for 30 days. You assume that within these 30 days, attackers will not have the ability to exploit these vulnerabilities. Now, what determines the highs, criticals, and lows can also and should be qualitative. A vulnerability on an external facing asset, or a vulnerability that has active exploitation, or a vulnerability that has active exploitation on an external facing asset that doesn't have an EDR, all of them should be weighted differently. So as you look at building the score, but then associating the score to an operational mechanism like SLA that can tell you, I am okay with all of these highs as long as they're not older than 30 days, and also judge operations by it. This business unit has a lot of vulnerabilities that are breaching SLA. This means that they are not part or not in our risk appetite. And this concept of trying to weight in based on whatever qualitative measurements you have, the operation is a concept that helps align on what is the right thing to do, what me and my counterpart outside of security are agreeing on, and then also hold them accountable. Okay, we gave you 180 days to fix the medium ones, but you have to fix the critical ones in 30, because this is where my risk lies. So these type of conversations are becoming more common, and they really help balance the overall operation, especially as it's very scattered across the enterprise.
Yeah, I want to pick up on one part of what you just mentioned there, which is around that time to exploit. Is a vulnerability being exploited? I think, vulnerability management through the lens of ransomware has probably, got so much attention right now. And for people on the call, I just wanted to reference our ransomware trends report from 2023. And one of the takeaways of the most exploited vulnerabilities for ransomware groups in 2023 was the dwell time for the top vulnerabilities, the top 5. And I think this fits in really perfectly with the conversation, is the dwell time from disclosure to most recent exploitation of the zero login vulnerability was 39 months. And, I think, and other vulnerabilities were 17, 19, 22 months. And I think what this highlights is that, almost all the vulnerabilities that ransomware groups are exploiting are vulnerabilities we've been sitting on for months or years, and that the media hype of 0 days is very much a misnomer and distracts us away from the reality of the long tail of vulnerabilities we have in our estate on any given day or week or month.
Yeah, so I think this is a reality that we just need to accept. We need to accept the fact that vulnerabilities will change their state through time. And a vulnerability can be exploitable, but not weaponized in the wild, or not used by a certain group, or used for crypto mining one day, and a different day we'll use for ransomware. It's just our reality. And I think the way to address that is exactly related to what we said before. We need to set the right tone on what we deem as risk. We need to get the right data sets. So monitoring exploit databases is not enough. We need to have as much and as many inputs of what is happening out there, what is happening in the wild. How can we use this data in order to drive the decisions that we're taking as the program progresses, or as the time progresses, in order to reprioritize or push along vulnerabilities. It's never easy. Actually, it's exactly for the people around here who are building software, it's exactly like building software. There is always, you always have the most urgent bug, and then you wait 2, 3, 4 days, and you have a bug that is even more urgent. It's just a reality of how this world works.
Yeah.
But I also think that there are some mechanisms today in the market. I'll just mention one, EPSS, for example, that could help you preempt some of these decisions. So For those around here in the crowd who are not familiar with APSS, APSS is it's an acronym for the Exploit Prediction Scoring System. It's an open source API that is managed by an organization called First, and it basically allows, based on different characteristics of vulnerabilities, to predict how likely a vulnerability is to be exploited. And this is even before these threat feeds or these different threat actors are using it or giving us an indication that this vulnerability is being used. And we found that the customers, our customers that are using the APSS is either direct or part of their overall scoring mechanism to understand the likelihood of a vulnerability to be exploited, has the ability to preempt a lot of these and a lot of the things that are being discovered 20, 29, 30 months after, and basically get them fixed before even something happens. It's not bulletproof. It's not magic, but it gives us some kind of indication what we should work on first. And we strongly recommend customers to actually use it, at least as part of the temporal attributes for the scoring of the vulnerabilities.
I think having consistent and easy to explain methodology for this decision making, is really helpful for all in the organization, isn't it? Just there's no Excel spreadsheets, dare I say, that I've seen organizations use, and having some solid logic makes it much easier to stand behind the decisions you make as well.
Yep.
Now, I think we've mentioned one of the metrics, Yaniv, that you talked about. What about another one that we should be thinking about for better communicating risk with our vulnerabilities?
Yep. So we in Vulcan took a product decision, probably 2.5 years ago. That was fairly uncommon in the market, to split the way we score risk from an organizational standpoint I talked about a qualitative score and a quantitative score. And I want to talk about a qualitative score. We call it security posture rating in Vulcan. We've seen variants of it, by the way, homegrownly implemented by some customers or some prospects that we've talked to. And it's very simple. Essentially, what it means, you define, first of all, what is an asset in your environment. An asset could be a server, a laptop, a code repo, a container image, a cloud resource, whatever it is. And then you define what are the attributes that associate this asset with general cybersecurity health. This could be, they'll give a simple example, a laptop in your organization doesn't have an EDR deployed, is not healthy. No matter what's the state, how many vulnerabilities are there on it or how many aren't. An asset that has vulnerabilities that are breaching SLA is not healthy. An asset that has exploitable vulnerabilities is not healthy, so on and so forth. So you define what are these binary controls and that are associated to every asset in every type of your environment. It could be, by the way, it could differ. It could differ between assets that are part of production to assets that are part of dev or so on. You create this tree of this decision tree of what is a healthy asset. What is a healthy asset? And then what we do is something very simple. We signal to you based on the data that you bring us. What is the percentage of healthy assets and what are the percentage of unhealthy assets? And what are the actions that you can take to move the largest amount of assets from an unhealthy state to a healthy state? So for example, you can go in and look once you have implemented the system and say, okay, today in business unit A or in office in geography B, 30% of the overall digital assets in this unit are not in compliance with what I define as healthy. And then let's start talking qualitatively. What are the exact actions that could take these 30% and move them from being out of my risk policy, risk appetite to in my risk policy, risk appetite? It might be fixing just one vulnerability. It might be just deploying an endpoint protector on them. It might be just putting an MFA on the laptop, whatever it is. And then it allows you both to communicate and say, okay, from the board, and we have customers that reports risk like this to the board, all the way down to the operations, going to with the product manager or the head of the business unit and say, listen, you have today, your security posture rating is 90%. This means that 10% of the digital assets under your control and your responsibility are unhealthy from a cybersecurity perspective. Here are the top 3 things you could do, or we want to do with your team to make sure that these extra 10% are getting into a compliant state. We need to patch this log4shell vulnerability, and we need to add multi-factor authentication to every computer and make sure that you use your whatever third-party key or a secondary key for login. Once we do that, that's it. You're healthy, and then it allows you to both. It doesn't mean that you fix all vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean that you don't have any. Everything is vanilla on these assets, but it means that you choose and you have an ability to communicate what are the overall qualitative actions you have to take in order to move the score, and secondly, what are or how can you align on what is okay and what is not with the reference of every really granular reference of every asset in your environment. And this creates this, I would say, the second best thing. The first best thing, which I believe the industry just didn't solve yet, is trying to measure it in money, trying to eventually say this is the financial impact that might happen to your organization if this thing will be exploited. I think that for now it's more of a myth than reality, but I think that as an industry we're going there, and I think that with the development, for example, of AI and models, there's definitely things that could be done to associate not only technical qualitative stuff, but also qualitative measurements, but also financial qualitative measurements to the actions that we are taking.
I love the idea of being able to measure assets by compliance to policy. I think that's hopefully for many people on the call. Your organization, you may be reporting that already. I suspect many will not be able to do that level of maturity yet, but it's something certainly to aspire to. And even for me personally, Yaniv, is being able to hold each different business unit by compliance to policy. I'm not one for naming and shaming, but when the colors to the exec team and to the board show which groups and functions are more or less compliant, I have a feeling that you would get a lot of traction on progress on those more reluctant or recalcitrant, shall we say, to come to the table. But I think this is probably, you mentioned this right at the start, which is business friction and competing priorities with other stakeholders. I met the CISO of Expedia, I think it was, at the start of January, and he had a wonderful phrase, which was, being CISO, my job is about unlocking the frozen middle ground of stakeholders. And I think that really is the difficult part of getting alignment on priorities. And if we want to patch these assets and improve this gap to getting compliance, it's going to cost you 2 weeks of development, for example. It's that constant trade-off of trading security for paying off security debt, but also delaying features and fixing bugs that we all have as well, unfortunately. Yep. So I'm just wondering, how your clients navigate that as well, based on what you've observed.
So I think there's a reality we all need to acknowledge as security folks. So there is business without security. There is no security without business. That's the reality. If the company will go bankrupt, not because of security, it's because they didn't innovate, didn't deliver fast enough, didn't brought products to the market, didn't have the ability to operate appropriately, then all the security controls in the world will not matter. And this is why this is a battle we will always lose. When we fight the business, what we need to prove is that the action that we are taking will eventually be more impactful positively on the business. Then I always like to give an example. If you have a customer, again, from the software world, we're building software, and we have customers that want to change the color of a certain button in the application. Why? Because they don't like the color green and they want to get a red button instead of it. And we have, it all comes down to a developer that has other tasks in their sprint, and it's either change the color of the button or patch a certain vulnerability. That's the reality. And now we need to ask, the customer says, I'm not gonna renew the software if you're not changing the color, or I'm gonna, I need to decide eventually as the business owner of this thing, what is more important, the revenue coming in or the safety of the software. So this is, just a microcosmos of probably millions of decisions that needs to be made between security people that are accountable. They are held accountable to this operation, and I like to call them allies, but they're allies, they're counterparts, they're remediation owners in engineering, DevOps, cloud, IT. It has a huge list of tasks that are directly generating revenue, directly influencing customers, directly touching the business. I mean, the way that is tangible for them because they're not security folks versus, changing a configuration on an S3 bucket that remains open to the internet, or doing something similar. And I think the baseline, I mean, I really like what the CISO of Expedia said. I think the baseline is creating the alignment and forming the partnership, and also understanding that you're not gonna, you have to play this business game. You have to be able to also offer alternatives. Okay, you can't patch the vulnerability now. Maybe we can apply certain mitigation that will degrade user experience a bit, or will make my life a bit harder as a security person for another 20, 30 days until you'll be able to patch. But our goal is just the same goal: drive the business forward, improve delivery, increase customer satisfaction and experience, as well as part of that, make sure they're safe, make sure their data is safe, make sure their experience is safe. So it's all about alignment, and it's all about forming these relationships. And it's really hard, to be honest. Like, it's not when we deploy, usually in the very large organizations, what I tell them, listen, the fight will not be, getting the machine to work, putting the plug in its place. The fight would be to get the people see the value and engage with them and tie the knot between their remediation hours. The way to do that is make their lives easier. Make sure you live where they live. You communicate where they communicate. Do the heavy lifting prior. Provide golden data. The biggest thing is trust in these relationships. And I think where we made a lot of mistakes is that when we build security products, we build them for security folks who understand context, and they can differentiate between not really false positives, but the less important things or the more important things. But the reality is that security folks that are doing vuln management, AppSec, and so on are triage and broker functions. They are triaging, and then they are brokering it to the people who actually fix. And every mistake or everything that is unclear from the end, from like the point solutions that we have, might influence the trust in the things that we're building or the process we're building with our counterparts, and can hurt that. So alliance, trust, processes, even before technology. And I'm saying that as a technology vendor that handles these things.
Well, I think, policy and process are fundamental, aren't they? I absolutely 100%. You talk about some of the devices missing EDR. It's these small gaps in builds and inconsistency of policy and process being applied that enable threat actors to be successful, unfortunately. And it's that time and patience that they have on that dwell time to be able to use it against us, unfortunately. So one question I was going to ask you, Yaniv, as a SaaS native organization ourselves, how does vulnerability management and prioritization work in compute systems that may only be online for an hour or two before they're destroyed? And so where does vulnerability management fit in the life cycle of such, immutable, treat them like cattle, not pets mindset?
Yeah, I actually think it makes our lives as, again, exposure managers, vulnerability managers, just better and easier. Because that's what prevents us from patching everything, or what prevents us from just going and fixing everything we can. It's not only resources, because it's a click of a button. You go to your patch manager, you say, okay, upgrade all of the software, and it will be upgraded. You don't have to. It's not like 20, 30 years ago, you have to drive with your car, take a CD, install. It's the heavy lifting is not there. I think that what actually prevents us from doing this is the fear to break something. And it's the fear that there will be impact to the changes, because software is so entangled and so dependent on one another. There are so many dependencies. Every dependency you upgrade probably has a long tail of influence. And the moment your infrastructure application is immutable by nature, many of the things that you're doing are not tightly coupled, but are loosely coupled. And by that, it's very easy to kill something, spin it up again, see if it works. Okay, it doesn't work. Let's roll back. Like if you're really, I think the reality is we're just not really there yet. But let's look at 10, 15 years from now, where environments will be immutable by their nature, and we're going to be operating with modern systems of today, which I'm sure are going to improve more. I think vulnerability management and patch management will become a more continuous, recurring, automated process, very similar to QA testing within the CI pipeline. And the more you have the ability to go down this route, the easier, and obviously while still creating these handshakes, good processes, alignment, what is important, what is not, the easier it will be for you to reduce risk in these environments.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement about reducing risk. So just for everyone who's still listening and online, please submit any questions. I think we've got maybe in 2 or 3 more minutes of discussion, then we're going to come to any of the questions or comments that you want to put out there, and we're going to discuss those. So Yaniv, last one I was thinking is, now we've covered off qualitative versus quantitative. We've talked about measuring risk, time to exploit. Is there a third metric that you'd encourage everyone on the call to be thinking about and considering?
Yeah, definitely. I think that probably the third most effective thing that you can measure is remediation velocity. It's by the way, it's super quantitative. It should be also measured appropriately. So you don't want to measure remediation velocity on all of your vulnerabilities, because then you're being introduced with like 1,000 lows and one and you remediate one high, and you think you're doing a bad job. You need to do it in the right cohorts, but eventually this ratio between introduced vulnerabilities of a certain kind, that is the subjective kind that you deem as risky, as impactful to your organization, and the ones that you are remediating, is a very impactful one. So let's say in Vulcan, what we deem as a risky vulnerability is a vulnerability with an active exploit that is present in our production environment on every type of asset. Doesn't matter if it's external facing or internal, and so on. So every vulnerability with an active exploit, don't care if it's critical, low, high, whatever it is, we fix. And we measure the remediation velocity of these. So how many of these are being introduced and how many of these are being fixed? And we can then, once you have the data set, you can start asking yourself, what are the root causes? Maybe we have a component, or we chose like this third party dependency that continuously releases vulnerabilities. Maybe instead of running this goose chase, let's just replace whatever version of web server we chose and take a different one. Might be a lot of heavy lifting. Maybe we need to replace our operating system. But once you measure that, and you can say, okay, this part is the part that creates a deviation between how much am I fixing to how much are being introduced, which will always happen. This is a goose chase. It's a rolling process. Can allow us then to understand how good are we, how impactful this is on our operation. Because when we have that, we can also measure that in terms of other velocities, the velocity of the way we release features, the velocity of the way that we fix bugs. And it gives us also a notion on the risk goes up, goes down, where. So that's the way, in our opinion, to do it.
No, I love that. I think it shows a much more healthy rearview mirror of how much you care about your vulnerability management, doesn't it? When you can actually show that you're fixing them in a sensible manner, rather than just reacting to whatever the news is today. Yeah, I love that. So right, well, we're going to get to some questions, Yaniv, now. So you're going to have to earn some money now with some of the questions we've got here. So let's hope that they've gone easy on you. So the first one we have, I'll read it out. From an IT operations point of view, isn't it easier to address all vulns at a time with the available and tested patches, instead of patching separately, lows rarely, critical high within 15, 30 days of discovery, question mark. How
It's
do you think about that?
it's an excellent question. And I think the way we encourage and the way we also present data when we present it to customers, it's a matrix of decisions, and it has two dimensions. There is a dimension of risk, what actually needs to be fixed, and when, and based on what SLA. And then the second dimension is what do you need to actually do, or what are you using to actually fix it? And the good thing, if you have the data, is you can, for example, start looking at roll-up patches. So we see it a lot in operating systems, where you have let's take an advisory that is being released that packages in multiple patches from previous releases that patches a lot of vulnerabilities. So sometimes we'll come in and say, listen, this roll-up patch has the ability to fix 35 critical vulnerabilities that actually influence your security posture rating, your qualitative risk scoring. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's a definition, or it's the combination of both. And it also very much dependent on the actual urgency. So let's take ourselves 2 years ago to the Log4j vulnerability. No one had time to ask themselves, can I patch this specific thing, or do I have roll-up patches that can maybe fix this patch or another? We had to go in and fix this particular vulnerability with a particular hot fix because it was so urgent, so important, and was out of regular operation. In regular operation, you can choose many different methods. So I recommend, by the way, to use roll-up patches. We also need to remember, and we have another question later probably on that roll-up patches usually have wider blast radius. And this wider blast radius can again cause wider issues as we roll up. So I think it's a balance. It's a matter of the way you want to run your operation, but it's definitely looking at the problem from these two dimensions: the actual subjective criticality of the vulnerability, and what tools do I have, because one vulnerability could be solved with multiple types of patches to actually apply at a given time based on my resources and based on the way my operation is run.
Yeah, great answer. I think context rather than treating everything the same way is so much more informative and better use of resource, isn't it? And it's making me misty-eyed and reflecting back on my days of building Windows NT Server 4 Service Pack 1 and Service Pack 2, and
Yep.
that was in my box of CDs, and not even booting up and loading from NT Server boot base image anymore. Those are the days.
Yeah.
Maybe not many people will remember that on here, but I certainly do fondly. So that's a great question. The second one for you, Yaniv. What are your thoughts on the significant drop-off of CVEs listed as analyzed versus waiting for analysis compared to 2023 in NIST NVD? Thinking about the future if CVE sources evolve and change, I think.
Yeah. So first of all, I think I assume many are aware that both NVD is going through an upgrade, update, as well as I think more resources around it. But honestly, I've been waiting for this to pop up for probably, I don't know, 7 years. When we started the company, we started in a year where there was a 3x growth year over year in the number of published CVEs. And since then, we're continuing to grow about 30 to 40% year over year. The number of disclosed CVEs just goes basically larger, and it grows larger and larger. It's going to continue and grow. We have no way out of it. It just means that when you start becoming or being a bit more innovative in the way we digest them and analyze them. And they are, by the way, they're growing not only because software is more prevalent and because we're using more and more software, but also because vendors are becoming more aware to their obligation to actually publish and disclose their vulnerabilities. So this combination is creating a reality where basically our input is dramatically larger than what we had a couple of years ago. And I am positive and certain that this is an undertaking It will not be easy, but has to happen. And I think we also need to understand that this is probably, we have this this reality where, I mean, NVD is a public organization. It's not a commercial organization. It doesn't have any drivers for profit. And, you know, we're all living in different capitalist environments, especially in our enterprise environments, where we understand that profit drives action. And here suddenly we are demanding an organization that doesn't have incentives apart from the greater good to improve, become more efficient, to drive activities in a more innovative way without even giving it necessarily the resources to do it. So I think we have an issue, and I think we have it's an issue that is we see actively NVD in this trying to resolve. And I also think, and I can tell you that we had conversations about that between both vendor community and our customer community on how can we pitch in to this effort, and what can we do from a consortium building perspective or from a market perspective to basically contribute to this effort and continue to do something that is practically publicly for the greater good.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of, I think it was 4 years ago, didn't we, when we had the US government shutdown, and unfortunately NIST was, you know, the victim of a lack of funding, and, you know, there's a big backlog of vulnerabilities for a while, unfortunately. Great comment, though. Now, next question we have, and I think we started touching on this, Yaniv, but, you know, it really does get to the point around cost and resource. Now, how can vulnerability management take into account the resource required, price, lost cost of fixing a vulnerability in the prioritization? You know, what's cheap and fast to fix versus long and costly, expensive resource to fix? And how do we consider that in our metrics and prioritization as well? That's a great question.
Great question. Very, very, very difficult engineering problem to implement. We've been thinking about this for a very long time. So I'm actually optimistic with regards to the resolution of this, and I'll tell you why. I think that unlike patch management was done 10, 15 years ago by on-prem solutions like SSCM or BigFix, today the modern patch managers, if it's the large vendor ones or the smaller ones, are SaaS-based. So they have a lot of intelligence, statistics, and data about the deployment of patches, their rate of failures, their ability to deploy fast or deploy slow, whatever it is, the impact, do I need a restart or whatever. And I think it's just a matter of time until these SaaS-based platforms will start, patch management platforms will start building this data set and providing both insights retrospectively as well as prediction on it. So this is one thing that I think could do it. Second thing is, and we try to do it a bit, trying to analyze from the change logs, from comments, from different chatters. Today, by the way, it's way more scalable with LLMs to do it, which is another angle that we are seeking. But definitely an unsolved problem, and definitely a problem that I'm certain is going to get resolved. Once this is going to get resolved, the math behind how to calculate it within the risk, I think, will also be subjective, because some organizations will not care about what is the level of effort. They will care about only the impact. And some would like to really search for quick wins. Today, by the way I would recommend to search for quick wins is actually go back to these either roll-up patches, and try to basically get, you know, one action with a lot of impact associated to it.
Cool. That's great. We've got time for 2 more quick questions, Yaniv. I was wondering whether we would get through this without talking about CVSS, and lo and behold, we have had a great question about the use of CVSS for prioritization. And it's a great, you know, one I'd love your perspective on how, you know, if we want to incorporate environmental score to be calculated into CVSS, if you have 1,000 vulnerabilities, how on earth do we consider that? But then also using CVSS as well, how do we incorporate the business cost into that as well? Because, you know, those are incredibly maybe personal and easily biased pieces of data to put into that measurement for CVSS as well. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So I also replied on the answer for people here around the room with a blog post we've written on CVSS v4 versus v3 and how it is constructed. What can you do with it? And we need to remember that CVSS is a mathematical framework that has attributes that can be publicly associated to it all the time, and there are environmental attributes that the organization needs to actually feed it with. Most, if not all, organizations are not really using the environmental attribute of it. And I actually really like to simplify it and say risk is likelihood times impact, how likely to something to be exploited, how impactful it is. And the impact could be associated to, so the way I think about it, impact associates to and SSVC is another very good example. Associates to what is the actual thing that can happen, and eventually probably what is the monetary value that is associated to it. There's a lot of guessing game today around this. I think there are some mechanisms that could be applied. If you talk about like, for example, the pets and cattle type of method, the longer an asset lives, probably the more important it is. The more immutable it is, probably the less important it is. So there are many different philosophical arguments around what is impactful and what is not. When it comes to the likelihood portion, it's both usage in the wild as well as what kind of competency and controls you have on your environment. And I do think that when you talk or when you look at the environmental attributes, they are extremely hard to manually insert or take under consideration when it comes to vulnerability scoring. You have to try and do some kind of data analysis, some kind of algorithmical type of approach to it, because it's so nuanced, and especially when you want to tie those with the impact and so on, the nuances of it becomes even harder. This is, by the way, part of the core things that we do in our business. Part of the bigger problems we're trying to solve. I think we've got to a point where we are probably better than most, but still, compared to the actual problem, I think there's still a lot of work to do. Mainly, there are some questions around impact and around what is impact that are very objective. If I have PIIs on a certain machine that has critical vulnerabilities, it's objectively something that I want to probably do, fix faster, take higher or bigger or stronger actions on, versus things that are very subjective. I care more about this application and this application. This particular service provides more money to my organization than this, or it's more strategic to my CEO. Now we are investing in AI, so we have this small product that doesn't generate any revenue, but this is the thing. This is the future of the company, so this has to be treated differently than products maybe with more revenue. These subjectiveness around business impact is, I think, what today is challenging, and I think the solution to it, honestly, is rooted in user experience versus magic. Like, we need to provide ways as vendors to collect and to allow people to enter the subjectivity of their understanding of their environment into the models in a way that is fast, convenient, and scalable. I don't think that as an industry we have the ability to apply a magic equal to ChatGPT type of magic that will just solve it. I don't think this is the case here. I think the case here is mainly a user experience case where we need to just be better in the interface that allows people to get this data in.
Yeah, hallelujah to that. Being a security practitioner, remembering using, lots of the old Rapid7, Qualys, other, vulnerability tools. We completely forgot about the actual business context of, where all these things were, and what was the cost and human cost and other bits as well. So, I love the vision and hope, and I think what we're going to do is wrap up there, Yaniv, and thank you so much for your perspectives. And I love the 3 metrics. You think about the risk, time to exploit, your qualitative and quantitative metrics, and the remediation velocity. Those are all solid, recommendations for everyone to think about, better communicating your vulnerabilities. So, for everyone on the call, thank you again for attending. Thank you for your participation and for your questions. And as we always try and do, is finish on some positive notes. Today is both National Pi Day 3.14, and for me, probably more importantly, it's National Potato Chip Day. So on that note, thank you very much. Have a fantastic rest of the week. And Yaniv, thank you so much again for joining. Speak
Thank
to
you
soon.
very much. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for staying around. It's been great.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.